I think this is the FiRe version of The Voice. Kind of as close as we come to like really showing off by being smart guys. And so thank you all. I have heard various rumors on the street, so to speak, about your last 3 days, you know. I'm sure it was very interesting. The word intense was one of the adjectives used. And I think the simplest way for us to do this is you've obviously talked to each other for a long time. We're just here as observers, and we would like to hear what you have figured out.
I think they look amazingly refreshed.
They look pretty good, yeah. They're laughing, which is a good
Well, you know, appearances can be deceiving. Do we have the deck up? Can we go back?
Yep.
Can we go to the front page? Okay. There is no privacy on the internet. Get over it.
Well, thank you. I think that's. Did we win?
How many people remember Scott McNealy saying that in the 90s? And you know, I think what I want to do is spend a few minutes talking about this very intense journey we took in getting to at least the beginnings of a technical approach to this problem. Suffice it to say, however, that it was an intense discussion. There is an enormous amount of passion around this from a number of different perspectives. You know, there are those who say it's okay that companies are watching what I do. It's okay that the NSA is looking at what we're doing. And there are others who feel just as vehemently that it's not okay. I thought it would be helpful just to look a little bit at, you know, 200 years of at least Western tradition and the UN tradition to say, you know, this is a concept. The concept of privacy is something that is enshrined in our thought, in our traditions, and in our law. And nobody said this better, I think, than Justice Brandeis, who used good old-fashioned American plain-speaking, plain talk to say that privacy is the right to be left alone. How many of you feel like you're being left alone on the internet? Exactly 0. Interesting. Interesting. So that's where we start. So we spent quite a bit of time thinking about how do we want to scope the problem. And we needed to get to somewhere from what the previous slide said, which is very elevating and uplifting language, to something that we could wrap our arms around as technologists, because I don't think any of us here are lawyers. And so we've got to get to a point where there's something that we could actually understand and take and implement. So this is our working definition. You can argue with it. You can tell what's wrong. We can wordsmith it to death. We thought about that. We did it a little bit. But it's fundamentally, it's saying that data about you should be controlled by you. Full stop. So that means you get to define what you consider personal data. You get to decide who has access to that data and when. So that means, in addition to the fact that you control that access, you can turn off control of that access. You can change it. There are expiry dates to all these things. So that was our working definition. As I say, this was helpful for us because it allowed us to frame the problem in a little bit more constrained a fashion. Please feel free to jump in with questions if there are any. And I put this slide in partly for Richard's benefit. William Binney is a 30-year veteran of the NSA, and he was quoted recently saying, the NSA has assembled 20 trillion transactions about U.S. citizens with other U.S. citizens. And I find that a little disturbing. There were conversations, again, I just want to play some of the discussions that we had. There were conversations that had a flavor of the following. It's okay, you know, it's not the NSA that's the problem, it's companies that are the problem. And then I think it was, Mary Branscom's still here? she said, yep, there she is. She said, well, she made the statement that, it's not the current government and the current set of politicians that we worry about, but maybe the next generation that would have this great set of weapons available to them. So the government side of it. The commercial side of it, somebody showed me this wonderful tool called Ghostery. How many people have heard of Ghostery? Who was it? It was Simon. And what Ghostery does is it tells you who's tracking you on the web. It's a wonderful little tool, and it's very enlightening. And so you go to CNN.com, for example, and there are 21 tracking beacons on CNN.com. 21. Now, there are those of us who said, well, that's part of the implicit bargain that we make. In exchange for viewing the content on CNN, we make this implicit bargain that CNN gets to tell its partners that we were there. And a lot of people, and I think all of us in this room kind of get that. We understand that. I don't think too many of our mothers understand that that's what's going on. And what's interesting about it too is we've accepted that agreement after the fact. We've rationalized that. CNN didn't, and I'm picking on CNN, everybody does it. CNN didn't ask us if it was okay. And many of us probably would have said, sure, it's fine, but CNN didn't ask us if it was okay to send tracking data back to their partners. And so we just accept it now as sort of the way that the web works. So we stepped back and we said, what can we do about this? What is a technical solution to at least some of these issues? How can we make the net more trustworthy and meet our definition, our working definition of privacy? So we came up with these design principles. Every great solution that I've ever worked on, at least, always has a set of design principles that you're working toward. You can't climb the mountain unless you know which mountain you're trying to climb. So we said, first of all, the solution has to be opt-in. It's not something we can mandate. The net has never been anything that has been something that can be legislated or mandated, no matter how hard we try. As we mentioned, your data is your data. It's you decide what's made accessible to a service that you're interacting with, a website, an e-commerce site, or whatever. The foundation for all of this, and this is something that gradually came out through the conversation. I just digress for a second. This was actually an amazing experience working on this panel because this was a clear whole is greater than the sum of the parts effect, as people contributed. Do I have time for a brief anecdote? This wonderful moment at MIT a number of years ago with the inventor of the logo programming language. And he taught the new math in Africa. And he was giving a lecture in his youth on the new math in Africa. And as he was giving this speech, more and more of the folks in the tribal elders and so forth left the room. And you have that kind of sense, something's going wrong. So he asked the tribal, one of them at the end, what happened? And he said, you Westerners are all alike. There's a right answer and a wrong answer. You insist on the right answer, and the other person must be wrong. When we have a meeting on a difficult problem, we sit around the acacia tree, somebody circles, somebody says an idea, next person builds on it, next person builds on it, we pass the token around, and we had a lot of that, I think, in our discussions where we built on each other's ideas. So it was a great experience from that perspective. Next thing. So one of the things that really came out was that an inalterable, unassailable notion of identity is available. And if you think about identity today, it's all by proxy, right? It's your computer has your private key on it, for example, or your username and password. All of which, if somebody's watching it or somebody steals it through key logging or what have you, can be stolen. We needed something that was absolutely unassailable. We'll talk about that. No one can get access to data without your consent, your control. We talked about that. We also thought the solution has to be flexible. In other words, there may be multiple instantiations of the solution. We're going to show you one scenario here. in just a moment that involves both a hardware and a software solution. But this is an instance of a class. Right? There are lots of possible ways for doing this. Personal data is perishable. This was Hugh's comment and his words, which I thought was just brilliant. In other words, at your option, under your control, you can forget something. You can prevent others from finding this data out. We had this conversation, I think, was about, my son runs for president in 30 or 40 years. Are they going to be digging up his old Facebook posts when he was 8 to his friends? So it should be perishable. And the last one was, if someone tries to access your data, you are notified. Every time someone comes in and says, I need to get your profile, your credit card information, any other personal information, you get notified and potentially have the option to block that access. So those were our design principles. There may be more. These are the ones that we chose to work with. And now let me walk you into the solution, and I'll be handing the mic off, the pointer off and the mic to some of the folks to show you some use cases of how this might be implemented. So the components of the solution. The first thing, this was David's idea. I give him full credit for this. A wearable device. One ring to rule them all, perhaps, or some other wearable device. There could be others, right? That has multiple biometric identity verification mechanisms with some amount of storage on this. And this is actually, we're not sure that it's possible for a ring today, but certainly with other devices, and it will be possible tomorrow. Somewhat analogous, for those who know the architecture, to a TPM chip in Intel i5 and i7 architectures, holds things like private keys and various other encrypted data and various other things, credentials. The key issuer, we actually have lots of mechanisms like this in place. We talked about the people who issue SIM cards, certificate authorities, things like that as potential mechanisms for doing this. The second part of the solution is this notion of a secure information chest or information vault. I teased Hugh, whose idea this was, that this was like Al Gore's lockbox. How many people know that Saturday Night Live skit? Nobody. Okay, oh gosh. Now I'm really feeling old. Anyway, so the idea here is that, and we'll show you a little bit of at least an illustrative internet traffic, that you would use this ring or this biometric device, which is looking at various aspects of your physical being, sweat glands, heart rate, so forth, stuff that is inalienably and unassailably you, and can then enable access to the data that's contained in this vault. So here is a person buying or browsing the web, goes to a cloud service, cloud application, and said, show me some whatever, shoes. Now at that point, typical e-commerce application might say, look into the purchase history, other profile data, age, gender, other sorts of information. Now today, that information is all stored up in that site, in their database. We're saying tomorrow is, through a set of protocols, that a request would then be made to the information chest, which actually has that information, which you own, which you control, and it would not allow the service to have that data unless you swipe your ring or your bracelet or whatever device it is, and then it returns it and then presents the information back to the user. In this way, let me just say, this is a sketch of a germ, of a prototype, of a kernel of an idea. There's a lot of details to be worked out under the covers, technically, in terms of the protocols and so on. But all of us who've been doing this for a while feel that this is eminently feasible. But in this way, as you see, we've satisfied our design principles. That you own the device, You own the data which is in the information chest, and it might be locally in your home, it might be in the cloud protected by massive amounts of encryption, whatever. It might be backed up in interesting kinds of ways and so on, but fundamentally it's your data. And this cloud service only gets it when you give it permission to get it. So that's the basic idea, and we want to walk you through a couple of scenarios in a little bit more detail. And I'm going to hand it over to David to talk a little bit more about the e-commerce example.
I need a microphone, though.
Microphone.
Yeah.
Here we go. That was fast.
Barry, one quick question.
Johnny right
Yep.
on the spot.
When the cloud is given permission to access your data, does it keep it, or is it just taking a look?
It's just taking a look, and so there's an expiry
Not
associated with it.
reside in
It can be given in a perishable
decide.
fashion, though, Mark.
It's up to you.
Yeah.
What I love about e-commerce is it's very practical, it's current. We know that there have been many organizations who we have stored data with that have failed us. They have lost our data, it's been stolen, it's been compromised. Our issuing banks have given us new cards. All the scenarios that make e-commerce relevant. For a quick example, one of the things is that this device that we wear, this bioreader, this authentication ring, is in proximity then to the devices that I'm going to use to access typical behavior. We're not changing our behavior, we're just modifying the result of the behavior. This ring authenticates me to my device. My device then is what allows me to grab an application, log into someone's website, go shopping, and do what I normally do, except when it's time to check out and pay the bill. I've authenticated myself to this. My ring stores tokens, maybe some private keys, information. On my device, on my tablet, on my PC is some type of a application that allows for the sharing of, the transporting of these tokens and encryption keys to some other system. In this case, the website that I'm shopping at, the shopping cart itself. Once this exchange of information is made of a token, not the real data, just a token, maybe a key, maybe some type of permission embedded in within that token, the merchant says, great, I'm going to create a transaction ID. This transaction ID is not what then I say, here's my credit card, go do something with it. No, instead, because the merchant, they don't want my credit card. They don't want the liability of this. Today's world, they have to have it, but they don't want it. They just want the money, frankly. And I want them just to give me the product. So instead of me handing my credit card number, even a tokenized version of a credit card number to the merchant, instead, the merchant is going to generate a unique ID. This unique ID contains payment information. Their processor, their bank, their preferred way of settlement is going to contact me and say, do I have permission to fulfill this transaction? If so, system that I've authenticated with my ring, please hand me the corresponding keys and the data that I can unlock on my end to settle. So now what we've got is a payment mechanism happening, the merchant not having to deal with my data, therefore they're not having to deal with compliancy. The trusted financial institutions, which have to deal with compliancy, still deal with compliancy, but now my relationship personally is handing that trust to them. I've already trusted them. The merchant's already trusted them. I don't have to trust the merchant. I just have to trust them to give me product. Well, I think it's a brilliant way now to change up the way and the flow of data, still fulfilling the same thing, still using the same services that exist, except now I own me. I am contacted. The bank, instead of me having to opt into the merchant and I agree to your terms to protect me, no, the bank is agreeing to my terms. My term is, here's my data, you've requested it, yeah, I'm going to give you this temporary access to my data. And then when the transaction completes, the information expires, and I am back to normal. No one's got my stuff. No one has used my stuff except in an expired temporary way. Hooray! That's one example. You're going to talk, you know, you're wired.
I don't know. I'm wired if it changes. Okay, I probably don't have to say much about this, but I will talk about it. The whole concept that part of what we went back to is to say, how was this handled in a village thousands of years ago? Really? And how it would have been handled is, I see the gentleman in the blue shirt in the front row here, is I would walk up to him and I'd have a secret to tell him. Now, I recognized him through his biomarkers. I saw his hair and his eyes, and I heard him speak, and I saw him walk. And so I recognize that this is the gentleman I want to give my secret to. The gentleman in the white shirt, who I don't trust, I don't want him, he's probably a nice guy, I don't want him to know. So when I don't give him my secret, I give it to you, and I give it to you when he's not around, and he can't overhear it. Now, I can't guarantee what you'll do with the information, but for sure, we have a trust that occurs. And it occurs because you recognize me and I recognize you. And one of the problems we have today in privacy and security is all of our security is tied to, generally speaking, a password or a MAC address or an IP address or something. All of those can easily be stolen. Easily be stolen. Yet we're entering a time when sensors have gotten so cheap, thanks to cell phones, that the concept of a secret decoder ring, yes, you've heard the term before in our childhood and before that, I'm going to go into that in a second, is within reason, whether it's a ring right now or it's a wrist or something. In other words, let's move the authentication of are you who you are from a device that's sitting here to your body, just the way we used to do it thousands of years ago. And once you do that, you have a whole new layer you can play with up here because I know for sure you're you. Someone can steal your ring. So in this particular case, I want to send the guy on the right who's got a cell phone there, the gal on left, she wants to, it is your left. Yeah, that works. Wants to send him an email. He gets it as decrypted because he's got the ring and he's authorized to get it. There might have been someone else also authorized to get it, whose ring was stolen by that pig down there. Clearly the pig is not going to have, for the purposes of this very, I worked hard on this, by the way. Clearly, now you got to notice, I did use only the items provided within Microsoft PowerPoint. I didn't go to the web and steal anything. And I started running out, so there's the pig. I don't know why they provide a pig, but there it is. So in this case, the pig does
just
get
you, Kevin.
The pig does get a bunch of data, but it's encrypted. And the nice thing about this is because of this technology right here, we can keep changing the encryption level. And by the way, we may have different encryption levels for different kinds of messages and interactions that we have. So for an email, where I could arguably spend lots of CPU horsepower encrypting an email, I could do 1024-bit or 2048-bit. I could do crazy things that no one's ever going to decrypt. It's certainly not in the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, and by the time they do, we won't care about it. So you could play with that, and you could have different levels of encryption because you're at this whole other level that you're playing with. One last point here. Clearly, the pig doesn't get the email. I hope that's clear. The other piece here is that the idea, just because I looked it up, we were sitting back here this morning, the idea of a secret decoder ring has been around since the 15th century. It was done then to transfer messages, and it was very simple encryption, of course, just swapping letters. But the only way you could tell that the A was now a C and the C was now a Z or whatever it was you had the ring, and you could turn the ring, and people made a mechanical ring that actually turned so that you could decode the letters that were given to you. And of course, in that case, someone could steal your ring, but you assumed that you got the ring to the person, I got the ring to him long ahead of time, and then by carrier pigeon, I sent you a letter, and only you could decode it. If anyone else got the letter, they don't have the ring. So this has been around a long time, and it actually worked for a very long time. So this is sort of an updated version of that. There you go. That's all I have.
And that's all we had.
We're ending with the pig. That's lovely.
Ending with the pig.
So I guess it's question time.
Wow. Well,
Comment time.
The first thing I'll say is that's the shortest presentation back, I think, that we've ever seen from the CTO Challenge, which doesn't mean anything's wrong. It's just that I'll just note that that's the case. Gentlemen, you want to make comments?
You betcha.
So what we'll do here is
Shark Tank.
we have, Mark Cuban time. We have 36 minutes. We have plenty of time.
They can eat us down to the
and we'll have
toenails.
questions from the judges. Make sure we all understand what you're proposing. You may have other things you want to say and add and so forth from your conversations. We'll just talk about this. And then we may even have questions from the audience. That would probably be a good idea.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that process, we'll vote. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Vaclav?
Yes, thank you. Gentlemen, it was great.
Saved me a lot of time.
Okay. Yeah. I really like your definitions, how you went through. I think that was the basis for establishing what's security, what's privacy, and where the whole reason for privacy, where it comes from. Because if we don't have the basis established how privacy is important, then everything else would be irrelevant. So the ring, I think it's a great idea. I'm sure that somebody will come up with a device which will be more tied to your body. I think that Larry, with the DNA sequencing will...
Well, the skin microbiome is obviously the DNA, reading the DNA of the skin microbiome, while not unique, is one of the things that would help establish it's really you.
Yeah, and I think that that's very important because when you guys talk a lot about identity, and when you think about how our identities are established today, actually, I don't know, do you know who you are? How come you have last name? How come you have first name? And who authorized that you have first name, last name? The concept of one's identity is very strange. So to tie into your body itself, I think it's more important than anything else because, it's a government who assigns you identity and your parents give you your name. Right, so even the concept of one's identity, I think it's very important, and the tying through the ring or a device, I think it was great.
Can I just make a comment on that? I'm not sure if you're asking an existential question or not, but let's assume you're not.
Well, we have the Shakespearean 2 beers or not 2 beers.
The issue here is really the identity, not the ring. The ring's, in my view, a bit of a distraction because a lot of the biometrics today, for example, are extremely easily defeated. You can get a fingerprint off an iPhone very quickly and break it. It's more the notion of being able to establish an individual identity, which is then established through multiple factors. Yep. And some of those will be biometric, some of them will be passwords, some of them could be devices that you hold, but it's that multi-factor identity that's important.
Yes, thank you. So that was the first requirement which I posed to you guys, which was transparent, simple for the end user. And I think that, yes, there is a way how we can do it from technology point of view, for sure.
It passes the mother test.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Passes the what? I'm sorry, the what?
The mother test.
Yeah. If my mom can use it, it's good. The second one was data ownership. And again, I think that was very strong, what you guys put it in, that really one should have absolute control over their data, no question asked. So that was really good. The one issue where I had was with trust, because from technology point of view, you describe how the whole thing would work, but we still have not established where the data is going to live. Who do we trust? To what extent that the data will be secured properly?
So can I respond to that?
Oh, please.
The data lives wherever you choose it to live, but it's encrypted and only unlocked through your own control. So it doesn't really matter. It's a completely distributed system with the data owned and controlled by yourself.
That's the premise.
Somebody who really wants to ask a question.
It's actually doable.
Okay, sorry.
It's doable today. I use a thing called KeyPass, which does exactly that.
I just have a question about that, because when you gave your example of how to incentivize your exchange partner to not want your data, you used an example which I think is an important example of the purchase, where maybe they really don't want your credit card information. But when I think about privacy, I think of, say, Google. Google makes all its money by selling me ads and getting me to click on ads based on the information that it has about me. So they really, really do want that information. And I think the internet today is not so democratic. It's really a whole bunch of big monopolies that control, at least for me, a lot of what I do on the internet and what I value it for. So if Google were to say, okay, well, in order to use any of my services, give me access to all of your information. I could say, okay, well, here it is in a perishable way. My sense is that their incentive is always just to copy it all down. So in anything other than the purchase, it seems like the incentive is for the internet company to ask for all your information and deny you access to their service, which is often a sort of a monopoly service. And so I'm wondering if you thought about that and how you would address that sort of, okay, well, it's kind of private, but we can just deny you access and copy everything that you tell us.
And I'd like to add to that question. There are, one obvious example would be there was a story in New Yorker 2 weeks ago about a Chinese spy who took 100,000 pages from Boeing. And he did it by taking the books away from the plant to his home, and then he copied each page. He whited out the word classified or top secret, and then he photographed the pages again, and then he shipped them away so that no one would know that the originals had been changed. And that's often a problem, everything from entanglement in physics using encryption to perhaps to this system. Have you guys thought about, even though you only have a moment of, and it's perishable and so forth, have you thought about that problem?
So I'm going to get fuzzy on the details of the technology, but you can make the data self-destruct and be non-copyable.
Okay. There are ways of doing that.
Yeah.
And to address the question that you had about the
Could you go into that?
Pardon me?
Could you go into that? How would you stop Google from copying all that data? And then would you put them out of business?
So what you would do with Google is you would decide on an individual basis whether you wanted to share that data and for how long. And so you may say, if I'm doing a search, I don't want to give them any data, in which case it's just a blind search on their part. Or you may say, I actually get value out of Google knowing a lot about me and tailoring the search results to my requirements. And therefore you'd give them data and you'd say, I'm only willing to do it for this month, or I'm only willing to do it for today, or I'm willing to do it forever. You'd have that choice. And if you give it to them for today, at the end of the day, that data which they don't have access to the lock and key of would self-destruct or be revocable. And as I say, I'm going to get fuzzy on the technology here, but it's doable, I'm pretty sure.
And maybe just adding a little something to this. Ultimately, of course, you can't prevent bad behavior. Ultimately, there are ways to circumvent things. But ultimately, you could set up a legal framework or a regulatory framework that makes it an illegal action or has punishment. You know, we saw, it was today, I think, because of the EU applying new privacy rules, Facebook has now just adjusted down default privacy around data it shares and just released a privacy audit tool to help you simplify. So there are mechanisms from regulation or legal enforcement that can change the behavior of commercial organizations. But of course, you know, bad behavior is possible in any environment. You can't.
And it also
prevent
could be
it.
part of the protocol as well, that, you know, once the data is accessed as a callback to say, now forget it. But, you know, the other thing I'd say is that two things. One is there are other choices besides Google. There's one that I know of where that doesn't read your mail.
Apple's.
But there, I earned my pay for the day.
Bing.
Thank you.
There's my $20.
One of the things we did talk about and we didn't include in the presentation was the following. You talk about incentivizing, and I think that's a great word because the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, just came out with a rating system which rated the large internet sites based on their privacy policies, and there's 6 criteria. It involves, you know, how transparent are they? How do they provide transparency reports? You know, in Microsoft's case, we've actually fought the government over disclosure orders in at least one case, and that's proceeding through the courts as we speak, and so on. And so they actually have a 6-star rating, and you know, we did have a brief discussion on maybe there's something there to say that sites would want to brand themselves with their privacy policies. So, you know, we are a 6-star site. We are a 2-star site. I think it was Amazon had 2, for example. You know, would that give you pause? and thinking about which sites you want to interact with or transact with and so forth. So this notion of actual, remember in the old days, you would go to an e-commerce site and it'd say, protected by VeriSign, I think it would say, and others and things like that. Maybe there's an option, maybe there's an opportunity to do something like that around privacy. And then actually have the EFF or some similar organization advertise it. So that you only want to go to sites like this, and this is what it means.
And it's probably on the site. It's probably got a little.
Exactly. So
and also, in Google's case, the Chrome browser does allow you the option of an incognito browser in which they at least say they don't keep any of the data about where you go or anything you do, in spite of their, of course, business model, as you say, being based on that. Nonetheless, they feel it's important to give that option, and they do.
And just for completeness, Internet Explorer actually had that option first.
For the two people.
Okay, that's why we like FiRe. It's all these different points of view.
Just to really add to that, Water finds its own level on those kinds of privacy issues. I think we could debate all day whether Google should keep this or not keep that, or Microsoft should keep this, or whoever. Water will find its own level. If there's enough push from humanity to say, I'm going to go use sites that don't track any of my data, then that will happen. And there will be sites that say, we track nothing, come here, our news is just as good, for example. That's going to happen more because humanity demands it at those sites, I think, almost more than regulation. Regulation could also get us there with full disclosures up front, but either of those are overrun by the fact that we have to know who you are. That is, we've got to for sure know that, or you've got to know that your identity is your identity. Someone hasn't stolen your identity. So that was sort of the first level. And that's why, whether it's a ring or some other kind of biomarker kind of device, that really overrode everything. And then we can put rules around how your data is handled, and you can decide where you go and where you don't go. And there will be choices in the future. There really are choices today. Most of us choose to go to CNN anyway because it's a useful news site, and we know we're being tracked, and we go there anyway. So.
Oh, yeah. I liked how you guys took a completely unmanageably broad topic and narrowed into one area that I think was approachable by a pragmatic means. Basically, what you're talking about is taking all the things that I discussed at the meeting there, then that your wallet is filled with prosthetics for the reputation that you used to meet at the village. You used to, in order to, I'll take these 2 horseshoes, I'll bring you a bushel of wheat later.
What a wonderful way of putting it.
Yeah, but the ring doesn't work unless you are, as I think one of you pointed out, a member of some trusted clade, like Neil Stevenson talks about in Snow Crash, Uncle Lee's Bigger Hong Kong, or your bank, where you can go in and say, I'm me. Everything's all screwed up. But I'm here now, and here, you see, here's the blood that can prove that I'm me. And I didn't really hear the notion from you about how this ring is going to be renewed and constantly updated.
Or initialized.
And it's got to be in person at a particular place. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to prove that you're you.
So there are many organizations that do that today. They validate identity. Banks, as you point out, telcos do it today. When we give you a SIM, we require a 100-point check. There are organizations that validate websites like VeriSign and other certification authorities. And you could use exactly the same mechanisms to validate the mutual trust of the identity.
But what happens at these 6-star sites that you're talking about is that for 30 years, they've always promised they won't leak. And then they always do, and a 6-star site is going to attract attacks from competitors, and that's a good thing, because it will make them better, but it's going to also decrease public trust because every single 6-star site is going to eventually collapse.
Well, therein lies another part of the reality of these kind of solutions. They're big. Not one of us is as capable as all of us. We have to have cooperation from so many different levels, a policy level, a issuing level, a trusted institution. Who chooses if they're trusted or not? Obviously, the technology is a piece of cake. It's just bits and bytes. It's the greater reality of getting us to agree on a certain set of standards, which has always been the problem. I don't think we're solving that one just yet.
Would you like to?
I know Richard's chomping at the bit.
I'd like to make a couple of broad observations. Number one, I should disclose that I'm a lawyer, for those of you who don't know. And the reason I mention that is because lawyers by training are very process-oriented. We truly believe that that's the Holy Grail. If you have a good process, you're always going to get a good result, assuming that process is properly implemented. So I want to congratulate the panel on the fact that you came up with a model of efficiency. You didn't fall in love with the problem and worship it like so many study groups do, endlessly, and just keep polishing it until it disappears. You took a very pragmatic approach. I was also impressed that you did not think out of the box. You didn't even realize there was a box to think out of. I mean, you really went out there. And I was reflecting back on some earlier experiences I had in life, and I'll be very brief with these. NSA has two missions. One is to exploit, the other is to protect. I was a general counsel on the protect side, so I dealt a lot with commercial entities on how can we best protect communications. And it was a fascinating experience. And one of the things I learned was that we at NSA did not always come up with the best solution that was timely. The commercial application sometimes was better, but it wasn't perfect. NSA was always in search of the perfect. So we were properly criticized as producing yesterday's technology tomorrow. You guys didn't do that, and I appreciate that. The other thing I value is that being on the acquisition side in the federal government for a number of years, a vendor would come in and sell me a solution without even thinking about what my problem was. You guys took, I think, a very positive approach and said, let's try to identify the particular problem sets, and you set aside your vendorhood, as it were, and came in and said, let's look at the problem holistically without falling in love with the problem and without making the problem so big that it's impossible to solve. So what you've come up with is a very exciting architecture. It doesn't answer all of the problems, but it serves as a feeder on here's what we can do in a collaborative way. I love that phrase. The group is smarter than the individual, with the exception of some individuals here. So I really applaud your approach. There's some holes, there's some things that need to be worked out, but I think you've come up with a very viable solution. It's not bulletproof, but I think it's a good thought piece that we can work with in a positive way. So I applaud your judgment. Cool. I know I'm easy.
You haven't voted yet, Richard. You're still holding back. You have to play a little bit hard to get here.
Okay.
So you did a great job defining the one-to-one relationship on privacy. But there's another level of privacy, and that is dealing with anonymized data for the public good, aggregated data such as data that comes out of traffic cameras, the good that can come from the CDC and NIH having anonymized data from the entire population in order to solve significant problems. And I don't necessarily think that I want an opt-out option from that anonymized public good. Can you comment on where the lines are being drawn there?
I'd like to say one thing, which is, and I think Vin would back me up on this, but we've already gotten to the place in big data analysis where you can't have that. So if you give me a randomized, anonymized set of data, which has already been tested, this has all been done in a clinical trial, I can, within a very short period of time, figure out exactly who that woman is, where she lives, the whole 9 yards, even though it was randomized and anonymized. So I think that even aside from permissions, we have a big problem.
Yeah, I don't disagree with your statement that getting truly anonymized data is impossible. But the fact is that the aggregate use for the public good is necessary, and the where you can't opt out. And I think that we have public streams of traffic cameras, for instance. There's no way to opt out of that.
You guys want to comment on that?
Well, and I just finished 8 hours of training in institutional review board for just this issue, which means I know hardly anything, because as painful as it was, it just indicates how deep the background on this is. It goes back 40, 50 years of legislation and reports and so forth. But informed consent is at the heart of that. And so everyone who has created data that the NIH is sharing, I use a lot of that data, has been informed, they have given consent, and they can opt out. And there's a very detailed literature on the rights of the individual not to share their data in any of these medical trials. So it actually is a little more complex. I don't know, maybe you've had the course, but it's worth digging into it to find out. So now that's not the same as a lot of the data you're talking about, traffic lights and everything else, but for medical data, you do have to have informed consent.
I think your team is saying, I think Barry said, this is a strong statement that you have the right to say no.
Mm-hmm. For the data you control. Once you're in the public and you're driving under a street light, as you know, the laws are reasonably clear around this. Once you're in the public, it's public.
Yeah.
Hi, I run Anchor-Free, and we're probably the largest privacy company in the world. We have an app called Hotspot Shield that's used by we have about 250 million people that have downloaded it to date, and about 250,000 new users download it every single day. And one of the things that we're finding by being at these privacy conferences over the years, speaking at RSA, I've had some time that I spent with Congress and the Supreme Court, we're finding that really most people think about privacy as a policy, not as a feature. And I was sort of excited to see that we've got a panel of CTOs, not lawyers, talking about privacy. It's a first off for me. I've spoken at the RSA conference and at many other conferences, and this is the first time, which is great. But I still question whether your approach is simplistic enough for 1 billion people to adopt. Because the way that I think about this problem set is are 1 billion people going to get excited about what you're talking about? Because there's only a few companies in the world that have hit 1 billion users. Facebook, Google, Yahoo, maybe Microsoft, I don't know, but 3 or 4, that's it. And so are 1 billion people going to buy the Ring? I seriously doubt it. Maybe, but I'm not sure. So how do we make?
Before you go, I think that what we're hearing from Hugh and maybe from the team is that it isn't actually necessarily a ring, but it is a multi-functional.
Multi-factor authentication system.
Verification, including biometrics and other techniques.
Yep.
So the Ring is kind of a placeholder for something that perhaps a large number of people could actually do.
You know, and I'll just add, as long as we've interrupted you for a second. Back in the early 90s, when Bill said a computer in every desktop in every home, people laughed.
Yeah, the thing that we're facing right now as an industry of people trying to protect people's privacy is that all the companies that are trying to exploit our privacy make it extremely easy and fun. You click a nice like button on Facebook and your privacy is exploited. And you feel good. And so then you've got, it's pretty clever. And then you've got all these privacy folks saying, well, if you just download this 50 megabyte file, or if you go and sign into your passwords 3 times, or if you do all these things, and the reality is, and I'm saying this as somebody that has built a product that's been downloaded by 250 million people. If you put one level of friction in front of the user, they're not going to do it. One level of friction that takes 10 seconds, you're dead. Like, there's no chance. It's got to go, it's going to be as frictionless and as easy as that like button on Facebook.
But several billion people.
I love it.
Well, there's the billion right there.
It's Vin again.
Mr. Billion.
I apologize for not being here earlier, but I was doing an interview. So first of all, the ease of use point is a very good one. And you notice how easy it is to do HTTPS, for example, because you don't actually do anything. Now, whether or not it works for you or not in terms of confidentiality is something we could debate. But to first order, let me be naive for a moment. The combination of certificates and the crypto can give you a certain amount of assurance that you're actually talking to the right thing, although there's always, man-in-the-middle problems and everything else. So we clearly have to be concerned about that. I think it's possible to create conditions under which confidentiality can be preserved on an end-to-end basis. But what I want to be careful about is not confusing confidentiality and privacy. Those are not the same thing. And so what I wasn't clear about, and maybe you'd like to come back to the microphone and help us understand how you differentiate between those two things, confidentiality and privacy, and what is it that Anchor-Free is protecting in your view? Is it all right if I ask him that question? Okay.
Yeah, we lost control 10 minutes ago.
So I think as an industry, there's, I think security is important, privacy is important, freedom to access information is important, confidentiality is important. I think that no one company solves all of it, but I'd like to see the companies that focus on these challenges to really not have the policy people or the lawyers focus on it, but have the product people focus on it, to make it really user-friendly and to really not have like 10 paranoid people using it, but to think about how do we get 1 billion people to use it. Yeah. And as far as Anchor-Free specifically, what we do is we make essentially the world's most popular VPN. Okay. It's a consumer VPN.
So if I could just interrupt for just a second, I think in terms of what the key ideas here are, I think the ring is it was shorthand for us, an easy way for us to talk about a way in which we could provide, to use the words, an unassailable notion of identity, of who the person is. Now, username and password is another way to establish identity. It's less unassailable, but you could argue the scheme would work with that, right? But the really key thing in our discussions was using that to control who accesses your personal data, as opposed to letting it flow essentially willy-nilly without any kind of controls on that at all. And so, whether it's a ring or a bracelet or a username or password or a certificate or what have you, the notion was, the ease of use concept, I couldn't agree more. And all this stuff would have to be fleshed out in the fullness of time with users and so on. Did you want to say something?
And I've got some questions and some comments. And we have 7 minutes. We can go over a little bit, but I love your privacy definition. You were kind of worried about it. I think it was a very good definition, and things can always be improved. But it is the strength of everything else you built upon. So nice job on that. I think you really set the right you really made a clear statement. It's not fuzzy. There'll be a lot of debate over it. There'll be a lot of argument. But nice job, because that's exactly the point. That's what it should do. It should generate debate, and it should have a clear enough expression of rights that you're forging new territory here. This is a whole new world, and it's going beyond the Constitution. It's going beyond current e-commerce rules, and you guys are the guys who have to do that. So I think you've done a very nice job on that. I like the idea of perishable data. That's a key issue here. I'm worried, Hugh, about the copy thing. I heard you. I don't think you've solved it yet, and it's been a big problem since day one of human life. Mm-hmm. And literally, when I said entanglement, that is the one way to break quantum encryption. You can actually clone it in physics. And I've talked to Gregoire Rabordi, who's the world expert on this, here at FiRe, after he sat with us and said it can't be broken. And I said, I can break it. And he said, don't tell anybody. So copying is a really big problem.
Don't copy that remark.
If you have access to private data and people tell you don't copy it, the technology of how to make that stick will be very, very. Otherwise, as our audience has said, none of this goes anywhere. It won't work. I love the SDR, and Kevin doesn't know this yet, but INVNT, of which he is a member, and others here in this room are members, we use that term. We have a secret decoder ring that we use as members, so love the name. Protecting the chest, I understand it can go anywhere, but if it's violable, that becomes a problem. And so I think you guys have kind of taken a pass on one of the really big problems that the society is facing right now, which is we've seen the NSA break all the chests open, and you haven't made any statements about that, but that at least has caused a lot of debate in the world right now. And so who I think, Vaclav has said, whose chest? Yep. And that's kind of what we're, there's a big issue there. Can there be for those who want to protect and want to honor that definition of privacy where they actually have their own control, is there a technology somewhere that they can put into place which even guys who have big data centers cannot break through?
That's easy.
Is there a way of doing that?
That's easy. It's called TrueCrypt, and it's pretty well inviolable.
It's called TrueCrypt?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So that part's the easy part. That I'm absolutely confident about.
All right. Well, that's two that you're very confident about.
You can go and ask the NSA. I think they'll agree with.
But I think the larger point was, that's the next level of discussion. Is where does that? What we did here was to posit the existence of such a chest.
Much of that chest might be on you.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be out there. It could be on you. It could be shared and brought back to you, because now carrying around a terabyte is not a crazy thing.
Right.
On you, and it comes with, and it's encrypted here, and it never relies out there. So how can someone get it here because they can't?
Mark? I have one comment on that. That's all fine, because you talking always about the technology, how great the encryption is, how difficult it would be break, etc. I think the larger issue is, who do we trust? The fundamental question, and you talk about philosophy or the deeper questions who we are, but the definition of trust, because if I get a ring, do I trust the maker of that ring that it's really secure? How do we establish that? That's the problem which we have in the society right now, because by default right now we don't trust anything and anybody.
So the same certification process that Barry's describing, you'd want to have the ring maker be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the trust no one is. The trust no one is part of the philosophy.
Ring.
Huawei wing.
I really like the e-commerce thing and the mail thing, and I think that the personal storage locker is a great solution. I also think, today it's Facebook, so they say, just click on Facebook, and then we'll steal your stuff or whatever from there. And that's the leakiest thing that's ever been invented. That's kind of like just take all your clothes off in the anteroom before you get inside the house. We tried once to launch a product called Human Database One, and I went to a big trade show, and every vendor I talked to liked it. And it was like, wow, this is going to be very easy, because if you use their product, instead of you having to enter name, address, it was just bang. And whether it was an accounting firm or e-commerce, they would just get all your stuff right away, no friction, no problem. They liked that, and so I think that that's actually a plus for you guys. I like the way you've done this, because it is tech neutral, and it allows things to change. If encryption gets better, or if there are other processes, you haven't fallen in love with the problem. You have actually allowed us to have a process and a pictorial view of how this works, so that it could be in place, could be voted upon, it could be adopted, and go on for 50 years or something, and be improved upon constantly. And that's a much better way of answering the solution set than saying, buy Joe's stuff or whatever. And that is it. And the policy part, which I don't think you've done a full job addressing, I don't blame you, but that's very, very large conversation. But I do believe that what you've done, you could give to policymakers and say, we want you to finish this proposal, and they would be able to do it. It's doable, Kevin's saying. So we have 1 minute left. We can go a little bit over, and then we'll vote. Is there anybody?
There was.
Vote.
They gave up.
His legs hurt.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with voting.
You're good on voting.
I'm good on voting.
Vaclav, are you ready to vote?
Totally. Should we let that one gentleman who's come up 4 times now ask his question?
Okay, one more thing from the floor, and then we're going to go.
Or 2.
Dan Lynch. Not 2, 1. Okay. Dan.
Dan Lynch, and 20 years ago, I started a company called CyberCash. Some of you may remember it or not. When I wanted to get e-commerce going on the internet, otherwise it would be useless. And anyway, so we developed a bunch of technology. Most of it worked. I had some pretty good crypto guys and all that sort of jazz. And we went and built a company, and it went public, and stock went to 100, and then went to 0. And we failed in the marketplace. The technology worked. And the reason we failed was this other gentleman over here, I don't know who he is, but it was ease of use. Our stuff was too damn secure for the, and that's why we failed. And so actually PayPal bought all our assets and in bankruptcy, and they still use that technology today because the technology was good. Our marketing was terrible. They were pretty darn frictionless. And that's the key to any solution. It has to be, not just pass the mother test. It has to be that I don't want to know. I mean, I want to hand you $1 and get my newspaper. That's it.
So Mark, can I just
It has to be invisible.
Mark, can I just make a very quick response? Nothing we're proposing is more difficult than signing into Facebook.
Yeah. As frictionless as it is today, there's no added friction. All the technology we're talking about happens behind the scenes. As Vince said, we don't think about HTTPS. It just happens for us. Right. We don't actually have to do the math every time. Yeah. And this is the same thing. It's just we know exactly who you are, and we know that the person on the other end is who they are.
Okay, so with no further ado, all in favor of this being a successful proposal?
I think we should grade it first.
No.
No, it's
They told me it's a pass-fail.
It's up or down.
Binary crowd, 0 or 1.
Yeah. All, right.
All going 1?
All right, I'm going to say yes with a caveat.
Okay.
I would like to say it was, for me, it was A-, A+, C.
And that means?
On the ease of use, it was A-. I think because there are few things we still should be worked out. On the privacy and definition, what we should do about our data, it was A+. On the trust side, it's C. We still have lots of work to do.
And Richard, your caveats?
My concern, my caveat, I think you've done a phenomenal job. I've gone through all of that. My caution is don't fail into the best practices trap. The best practices trap sounds good, but it's the LCD. It's the lowest common denominator.
Good point. Yeah. Good point.
But you've offered a phenomenal framework, an analytical framework for implementation. You know, the usual thing at the end of a scholarly paper, further studies required.
Yes.
I agree with everything they've said, and I think from what I've seen and heard, you pulled it out of the fire. I think you had a tough time. You had a really, really hard problem. We always try to give you impossible problems. This was impossible. You took that. You found the right definition. You built the right kind of process. You had your own process working. You came out with a great answer. I'm totally on it. So you win.
Yay.
So we will now take this work you've done and, to the best of our ability, publicize it. And to the degree you want to help us do that in your companies, please do. Anybody here who wants to help us evangelize this solution, please do. And you're welcome to keep working on it if you want to keep working on it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you, team.
Very good.
Thanks.
Great job.